right, so next up we have Jesse. He's going to be talking about Keyboardio, which is, like I said, an heirloom-based keyboard that you will be wanting after this. It's actually really nice, smooth wood. Nice, everything's molded. He'll tell you all about it. Yeah, well, maybe he'll pass it around. I'm not sure, but
yeah, we can at some point.
At some point, yeah, you'll be able to tap on it.
So I wasn't actually planning on talking much about the keyboard. Yeah, I'll give it a. Just out of curiosity, how many people here have been to China to look at factories? Okay, so. Hi, I'm Jesse Vincent. I'm co-founder and CTO of Keyboardio. Basically what happened is my hobby ended up becoming a company. I was building a thing for me and people kept asking where they could buy them. Eventually my wife and I took the hint. We ran through a hardware incubator. It took us quite a while to get to Kickstarter, but we did get there. Our goal had been to sell 400 units. That was what we needed to do to break even and not pay ourselves. We ended up doing that in 2.5 hours. At the end of the month, we had sold pre-sold $650,000 in keyboards. My background, I'm a software person by trade. Over the last 2.5 years, I've learned the basics of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, vendor management, the basics of soldering and CNC milling. It's been quite an interesting adventure. And so when Chris asked me to talk, I sort of was trying to figure out what the right generally applicable thing to talk about was. And I'm going to give a shot to just sharing some stories from our first couple trips to China, meeting folks at a handful of factories and things we saw. To be very clear, this is my first time through this. We have not actually physically produced our product in manufactured quantities. We've made 20. Our Kickstarter is not yet late, but it will be late, and we have told our backers this. We're being as transparent as we can about everything. Take everything I'm saying with a very, very big grain of salt. And if I say things that sound like they're absolute lies, call me on it while I'm talking. So the first time we went to China, The first time we went to China, we went with the hardware incubator that we were running through at the time. And they had a program where they shuttled us through a half dozen of their tier 1 factories. So I saw the place where the plastics for iPhones get made. I saw the power bricks for Apple devices being put together, and the people whose job, their entire job was to remove the fingerprints from the plastic packaging before it was sealed, because that's the standard that they work to. But none of these were factories that we were going to get to, that we would ever get to make anything in. And so Kaya, my partner in crime, did the simple, naive thing of going to Alibaba and searching for people who made products that looked kind of like what we were trying to make, figuring that it's probably a good idea to see the low end or the mid-range. And we found a couple and finally found one who was with it enough and communicated well enough that we were going to go visit. It was clear their English wasn't great. We hired a translator for the day. And I probably should have had a sense of how everything was going to go when the boss, the Lao Ban, picked us up in his minivan with his kid's car seat in the passenger seat. Drive about 40 minutes to the outskirts of Shenzhen. It's driving through a fairly rough area, and the building looks a little burned out. Walking into the staircase and seeing that there are no lights in the staircase and that we're walking up to the 3rd floor. And we get up to the 3rd floor and it is a factory. There are people making keyboards. We have not been taken somewhere for organ harvesting. So far we're doing pretty good. All the while the boss has been explaining to our translator, not really through our translator, but to our translator, how the staff have no loyalty. And of course he can't mistreat them because they could just get another better paying job if he said one word to them. It is very clearly a tiny little factory. We walk in and so we're making a keyboard and there are women there who are hand assembling key switches from the 2 little gold leaf pieces of metal and the 3 pieces of plastic and the spring. Now, as far as I know, when you get these key switches, the manufacturer usually has automated assembly. And I asked him about this. He's like, oh yes, but we can save 2 cents if we assemble them ourselves. And I still, to this day, can't actually figure out how he makes those economics work. But he gives us the dog and pony show. The sort of the first really interesting thing that he shows us is they have a dozen different keyboard types and a dozen different mouse types. And he explains that these are from community molds. And they don't actually own any of their own injection molds. But they don't need to, because you can rent molds by the day now. And that's the simple and easy thing to do. And it's a totally reasonable thing that I just had no idea existed. We start, he gives us the quick tour walking through the factory, and there is a man assembling smoke alarms, even though everything else is keyboards, but that's, they're making ends meet. There's a woman operating the reflow oven. She's looking at her iPhone, and I look down and realize that this is a kind of rough factory, a cracked floor, woman operating the reflow oven, dressed up a little more than I would expect for a factory employee, and she's got 1-inch wedges on. She's going out that night. And so it's really desperately unsafe, but this is just kind of how they roll. It's a very small factory. We get the tour, we go back in, and we pull out what was unintentionally the decoy product, a thing we never really intended to make, but we're curious about. And we show it to him, and he gets really excited and starts talking about the MOQ of 500 units, spends a bunch of time doing math on the whiteboard, showing off just how cheap he can get the product, which is moderately interesting. This was one of the first times we actually saw real numbers from a real manufacturer and real timeline. The cost of getting a Broadcom Bluetooth chip and the cost of getting a Broadcom Bluetooth chip unpackaged as sold in Shenzhen. And he could get us either one, and one was 5 times the price of the other. They were electrically identical. Interesting things. And so then I pull out the prototype of the real product. And he looks at it and he says, "Have you shown that to anyone else in China? You should put that away right now. Do you have a Chinese patent? If you don't have a Chinese patent, someone's going to steal that from you. You absolutely need to make sure that you protect your IP. If you have a Chinese patent, you can protect yourself. But if that's not patented, the boss of the factory you're going to tomorrow, he's from such and such province. They all steal things. If he sees your product, he will steal it, and he will make it without you." And I'm trying to explain to him that if this dude will actually make injection molds for the 64 cavities of injection mold that I need to make, and can make them at a lower price than I can, I will gladly become his customer. And so really it was this tiny little factory, and the guy believed heart and soul in the Chinese patent system and that it would protect me. Having talked to many other Chinese friends, it is not entirely a load of shit, but it's pretty close. But so the next day he's like, "Oh, I know the boss of that factory. I'll pick you up. I'll take you to his factory." And I say, "Well, free ride to a place." I should have said no. The next day he's late. And I'm looking at WeChat on my phone. He says, I'm coming. And then, "I'm sorry, I'm having a little car trouble, running a little late. Please wait." 10 minutes later, "Oh, I'm very sorry. Maybe you should go back to your hotel room to wait. I will be there." Another 20 minutes later, my engine has failed. The police are coming to tow my car. It will be about 4 hours. Please wait. And at that point it was, I've got a meeting somewhere else. I'm going to go take the train. I got to get there. But for about a month afterwards, twice a day, he was, "Please, I need your business. You need to come work with me." And the terrifying thing is this isn't the low end. This is low mid. As I'm going through this, I'm not going to name any company names because I'm saying some things that are somewhat unkind. You may be able to guess some of the factories. Please don't say the names out loud if you think you've guessed, because I don't actually want to say nasty things about people on the internet. If you need references later, I'm happy to talk one-on-one about stuff. So that was Company A. Company B is mostly a prototyping shop. We had been working with them for a lot of our early circuit boards. And they do bare boards really cheap. They do assembly. They actually wanted to do the whole product. They do a little bit of whole product stuff. And so we'd had really good experiences with them for bare boards. even for populating with standard components. And finally, it got to the point where we needed 20 units to make the 20 units we were going to show off on Kickstarter. And so we sent them a copy of our Gerbers, a copy of our BOM, firmware that needed to get blown on the microcontrollers, test and assembly documentation, and got handed off to another salesperson who said, "Okay, I'll get you a quote right away. This is pretty important." And then it was a week, and then it was 2 weeks, and then it was, "We found a problem with your design that will allow us to make you wait another week." This happened 2 or 3 times. All the time asserting just how important our business was and that they desperately wanted to make our large order. Until finally, Chinese New Year was coming up. If you are not familiar, Chinese New Year is a 2-week holiday. It is, because it's on the lunar calendar, it's February to March-ish. This year, February 5 to February 15, China is closed. If you think you're getting something out of a vendor in China, you're not. Realistically, if you haven't gotten it by now, there's a good chance you're not. It is the largest migration of human beings on the planet. Everybody goes home, everybody comes back. And so we were planning to go to Kickstarter in early March, and it was early February, and these boards hadn't shown up, and they swore they would come before Chinese New Year. And our project manager swore they would come before Chinese New Year. And then it was the Saturday where it started, and I mailed my project manager and heard back from someone else who said they were his replacement for the holiday and that he'd gone. And that our boards were definitely shipping. And that our boards were definitely shipping by fast overnight DHL, when in fact they shipped them postal mail. And they showed up. And they'd said there'd been some problems, but unwrapping the boards, there were the nice boards, there were some of the boards that were in individual anti-static bags, and there was a pile of boards wrapped up in cling film with the word fail written on them. 40% of our boards that basically didn't pass smoke test. So there were boards with microcontrollers and there were boards with LEDs, and some of the LEDs, they were literally on at a 30-degree angle from what they should have been. These are little 50-50 style, like NeoPixel kind of. And it wasn't until about 6 months later when I actually met the assembly engineer who'd done the assembly. And he kind of sheepishly said, "Yeah, I'm really sorry. That was the day before Chinese New Year of our company anniversary party, and my coworker who was doing QA was feeling a little rushed, and I'm really sorry about that. If you bring them back, I can rework them." Yeah, these things, they happen. So feel free to interrupt me with questions and comments and boos and whatever. So this past fall, after the Kickstarter, when we finally knew what our initial production volume was going to be, and so had a sense of what scale of manufacturing we could be doing, I went back to Taiwan and to Shenzhen with a company called Hardware Track. They're a Taiwanese venture-funded startup that's still figuring out their business models, but they do sourcing, they do project management, and every year they fly somebody from 30. They fly 30 startup founders over to Taiwan and Shenzhen to do the Dog and Pony show and to sort of prove their sourcing prowess. And so there were, and it was a free trip to Taiwan and Shenzhen, some of it guided. And so some of the folks I talked to while I was over there, I did on my own, some I did through them. One of the companies they took us to is one of the larger contract manufacturers on the planet. This was their Taiwanese outpost. Walked into their tooling shop where they make the giant hunks of steel that they use to make injection molds. If you've ever visited a tooling shop, it's usually a little bit grungy. People are working with giant hunks of steel and giant tools. I would have licked the floor in this place. It was it was like a hospital in the tooling shop. It was the cleanest I've ever seen. It was absolutely amazing. They were making BlackBerries, they were making Fitbits in this factory, and I knew there was no way that they were a manufacturer for us. But they get to the end of the tour, they have everybody sit down, all the startups sort of pull out their prototypes so that maybe something happens. And the sales manager runs over. He'd seen our Kickstarter. He was really excited. And he basically buttonholes his saleswoman. He says, you know, you're going to quote them. We would like to do this. And so we exchange information. You know, I mail her because I haven't heard from her in a couple of days, and she asks us for our design package with our product requirements and our electrical design, our mechanical design, our BOM. And we send everything over. And then she mails back saying, so we might have a problem. It says here that you guys are a startup. And we've had some problems with startups before. And so it's our policy that you need to be able to show 3 years of complete public financials, or you need to prepay. And we said, well, what do you mean by prepay? And she said, well, that means that you would need to pay in advance. Before we do any work, any DFM, you'd have to pay for all tooling. You would have to pay for all components we need to purchase. You'd need to pay for all raw materials we would need to purchase. You would need to pay for all the work we would do before we would start. And it's like, if these people will do the work for us, they would do a fantastic job. But as a startup, she's pretty sure that this means that she's now given me the brush off and she doesn't have to quote me. This seems to be what she's trying to do. And I say, well, so that's not impossible because we've done a Kickstarter, we've actually got the money in the bank. To be clear, there's no way we would do such a thing. My co-founder, who's the businessy one, says, so would you be willing to have us pay into escrow? Because we understand that you need to protect yourselves, but we also need to protect ourselves. Oh, no, no escrow. You have to pay us cash up front. We said, well, okay, why don't you, we could do that. So please continue quoting us. And then progressively, well, this part of your keyboard, the milled wood, we can't do that. You'd have to consign it. Oh, would you want us to do the electronics? We can do the electronics, but it would be a premium. And it was just fascinating to see just how far they would go to not quote. Their pricing was unsurprisingly not all that competitive. So you got a quote. We got a quote out of them. Of course we got a quote out of them. We ended up with probably over a dozen quotes in variety, the quotes varied from what appeared to be things written on a napkin and then typed in to really gorgeous documentation out of somebody's PLM that had broken out every single part, tooling cost, material specifications and dimensions, an electrical BOM that broke everything out by their component cost and highlighted all of the parts that had a lead time over 6 weeks, that broke out their markup. I'm getting ahead of myself. Those are the people who we are almost certainly going with. We talked to a half dozen tiny little Taiwanese keyboard companies. We talked the bigger end of those, nominally, oh yeah, we'd love to quote you. Oh, you want us to do keycaps? No, we wouldn't do your keycaps, we do our keycaps. Oh, you want to specify components? No, we're not an ODM, we're an OEM, but we'll only build with the components on our approved list. It got interesting. One of the little manufacturers that we talked to in Shenzhen, they'd approached us during the Kickstarter. During Kickstarter, you get a lot of really fascinating inquiries, ranging from a company that explained to us why we needed to use their artisanal bubble wrap made in upstate New York, and that we shouldn't use that foreign bubble wrap. 2 pages of text. To a company explaining why that they could get our product in the Oscar bags. In exchange for 500 free units and a facilitation charge. But also manufacturers reaching out to us. Some of them pretty clearly competent and some of them pretty clearly scary. One of the ones that seemed more reasonable was a smaller, seemingly reasonable OEM. And since I was going to be in Shenzhen, I agreed to meet them. And they had sent me a quote that was too low. I knew it was too low, some of the things that they were promising, it was clear they didn't understand. When the VP of sales picked me up in his Range Rover, I started to get a sense for how they did stuff. Walking into a factory in Shenzhen, they're going to most likely bring you into a conference room by way of the room that shows off all of the very sexy things they have made. It's got samples of products you might recognize, products you might not recognize. In this case, one of the things they showed off was a product made by a friend of mine. And that was not one of the people they recommended as a reference. They were a really useful reference. But they, so this was it became clear this was a plastics factory that was trying to become an OEM. And they did about 10 Kickstarters a year. They would manufacture for, or so they claimed, manufacture for about 10 Kickstarter projects a year. They had done keyboards before. This seems like a good sign. They even understood how keyboards get assembled, and there's some weird things. And it all seemed pretty reasonable until we got to talking about testing. And I asked, so what is the test procedure for keyboards? And to be clear, the usual test procedure in a Chinese factory for a high-end keyboard, and a high-end keyboard that will cost more than $10, is there's a person sitting there, the keyboard gets plugged into a workstation, there's a screen in front of them, and the person taps 1, taps 2, taps 3, and makes sure they see the right number of flashes on the screen. Every key gets tested multiple times because there are lots of little moving parts and there are solder joints and things can go wrong. And these folks said, oh, what we do is we pull one out of every batch of production and we test that. And we test a couple of keys to make sure that it works okay. And they didn't really believe me when I told them that wasn't the usual standard. Now, touring their plastics factory was not the nice thing I'd seen in Taiwan, but like they were making medical devices for German companies. They had clean room injection molding with everyone in bunny suits, and apologized profusely that I was not going to be allowed into that room. It's fine, but yeah. Their quote was reasonably decent. Like once they gave me a second quote based on everything we talked about in person. But in person they asked, before I left Shenzhen, could I leave one piece of my enclosure with them? Because they wanted to show it to their wood factory to make sure the wood factory really understood what they were getting into. And they'd send it back to me. I'm like, that actually seems like a reasonable request. And so I leave it with them, and it's been about a week, and I get there sort of updated. Yeah, the wood guy says it's fine. Well, can you send me my enclosure? And they're like, well, if you send us your FedEx number, we'll FedEx it on your account. That's not what you agreed to. Well, do you want me to pay out of my own pocket, my sales guy says? Because, it's expensive. I say, well, yeah, it's expensive because I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't said you'd ship it. He says, well, how's this? After you sign with I'll send it back to you for free. And that was the point where I CC'd the guy with the Range Rover who picked us up on my reply. And to his credit, the thing got DHL'd to me the next day. And it's kind of sad because they could have been a contender if they hadn't very clearly and stupidly just lied to me. There were other little issues, like they didn't do their circuit boards in-house, they farmed them out, and the samples they showed me weren't great. One of the companies that approached us is a Japanese company that helps startups facilitate manufacturing. And they're a part of a much larger company. They themselves are a startup. And a little part of me, the concept of manufacturing our first product in Japan, if we could make the numbers work, actually is quite appealing. I've seen high-end keyboards manufactured in Japan. They're absolutely lovely. And we asked them about how they're funding this whole facilitating startup manufacturing, and they say, well, we take a couple of percentage of your company. We talked about that, and that was not entirely, we could have worked around it. We could have, and it took a little while, and they asked some questions, and it started to go south when they said, so your product, the retail price that you're looking at, thinking about $700? which tells, so the usual rule of thumb is that your cost should be somewhere between 30% and 25% of retail. And so I started to get a sense of what they thought they might be charging us. The manufacturer they found had done gorgeous wood products for, like, had actually subcontract manufactured gorgeous wood products that had the Sony name on them. They would have only been able to do $500 a month max. And when we they said, we need a whole copy of your prototype in order to be able to bid on this. I'm like, well, you have all the production documentation. Shouldn't that be enough? Oh, unless we can see a physical one, it's really hard to do. And so we said, well, we don't want to waste your time. Can you maybe give us a rough quote to get a sense to make sure everything's going to work out before we send you one of our very few prototypes? And they came back with a quote that was exactly at what we had said our maximum cost was. And it left out things like the key switches, which, we have 64 of them and they cost 14 cents each. It became really clear that they, so the companies that brought us to Taiwan to prove their sourcing prowess, they introduced us to one of the 3 biggest keyboard makers on the planet that makes keyboards for the top 5 computing brands on the planet. And I kind of figured that this was not ever going to go anywhere because we were talking about initial run of 3,000 units. And I show up at the first meeting that I figure is a sales meeting to meet my sales guy. And he comes walking into the room with 2 mechanical engineers, an electrical engineer, another engineer who I never really found out what he did. And the first thing that happened when we sat down was they pulled out a PowerPoint deck walking through a half dozen design improvements they were recommending for what we had already sent them. And it was kind of wild. One of the weird things about getting quotes out of manufacturers in Asia is they're not going to even try. In my experience, they will not even try to quote you unless you are representing to them that the packet you're handing them is for your final manufacturable design. You have done everything you intend to do to it. Nothing's going to change other than their design for manufacturing, which is almost never the case. And so especially for our first product, I end up and this was the first of probably about a dozen of these kinds of meetings, a meeting with a manufacturer where they're walking through my design, pointing out things that I know were completely unworkable and asking me how I intended to manufacture them. And I have to very politely and nicely say, yeah, I know, how do you think we should fix it? Which, that was the whole point of being there, was to learn what the right thing to manufacture, like how to do the manufacturing well, and to lean on these people who are professional manufacturers who have done this, in some cases, hundreds of times a year for similar products. But even getting in the door can sometimes be special. But so these folks, these are the folks whose quote wasn't the cheapest, but it was by far the most detailed. It's the one that I actually believe. Initially, they said, well, so the big problem for us is this wood, because we've tried to quote this wood in Taiwan, and the best price we found is about $120. What's the best price you've found? I say, well, for making it in North Carolina, what I found, the best price I've gotten is $22 per half. And they go away and they come back and say, so our sourcing folks in Shenzhen have found a wood factory, and they can meet your price, $22 per pair. And I open my mouth to correct them, and then the right part of my brain strangles my throat so that I don't correct them. But so after Taiwan, my next stop was Shenzhen. And so I got to see the keyboard factory where these folks would be making my product. It was not the cleanest factory I've seen. It was not the dirtiest factory I've seen. It was the factory where I saw them churning out hundreds and hundreds of keyboards per hour for one of the larger PC manufacturers on the planet, injection molding all of the keycaps for a keyboard at once out of a single mold and mechanically, robotically slapping them into the keyboard with no human intervention. And there's no way we're going to get that level of tooling automation, and we don't want it. They showed me their test lines. I watched people actually testing every key. in addition to what most factories had where they showed it on a screen, the woman was actually wearing a headset and got a beep for every key. They seem to have put some effort into this. And then they actually took me to the wood factory they found in Shenzhen. It was a little bit further out. It was a family factory. And so what I saw was, I met the boss who spoke no English, his junior salesperson who spoke reasonable English. They were mostly at the time making wooden iPhone cases, wooden furniture, and little wooden Apple Watch docks for charge cradles. And so they had a whole bunch of they had a couple of 6-head CNC machines, a couple of nicer single-head CNC machines. They had a lot of hand finishing. Everything was getting hand finished by a human. Almost everyone was wearing safety gear. One of the women who was doing the final sanding pass on a lot of these products wasn't wearing a mask. That sketched me out. I asked him, like, if we went with you, could we pay extra to make sure that people get masks? And it was explained to me that no, they have masks. She just doesn't find it comfortable, and they can't convince her to wear it. And as a Westerner, this makes me really uncomfortable. But talking to a lot of people that, other than at a sort of tier 1 OEM, that's actually the good end of what you're going to see. And this was not. This was a tiny little factory, a family factory. I met the boss. I met his daughter. I met his mom. He and his daughter and his mom lived in a small room at the back of the factory. They said they would make me samples of our enclosure to sort of prove that they could do it. At this point, we still haven't signed anything. But about 6 weeks later, I got 3 sets of sample enclosures. These are 2 pieces that they made. Both the maple that we said we wanted, and they tried really hard to sell us on butcher block style or racing stripe style because they can use cheaper wood, or they can use the ends of the wood, and so it can be a lot cheaper for them. They really wanted us to use cherry instead of maple because cherry they can source locally, and as they kind of complained to me and kind of apologized to me that their maple price is really high because they can only get it from Canada, and when it comes from Canada, it has to be FSC certified, which, assuming that it remains true and it will get written into the contracts as best it can, that's exactly what you want. You want to know that this wood was sustainably harvested from a reasonable place. Thankfully, maple mostly grows like a weed, and since then we have been working with them to. Initially, they promised that they could do some ODM services for us. That turned out to not be so true. They got busy, and so things have gone a little slower than we'd like. There's some stuff we wanted to hand off earlier. Don't tell them, but we're almost certainly going to sign with them as long as we can justify the money. And from everything we've seen so far, that money looks totally reasonable. Yeah, that's most of what the anecdotes and rambling I figured I would do. I'm happy to talk about other stuff for this stuff for questions or yeah.
Did you try building them in the United States?
So we tried so hard to build them in the United States. We got introductions from a major customer to 2 of the larger keyboard companies that manufacture in the United States. Both of them turned us down. When we were trying to figure out how to get the wood made, we were pretty sure we were going to have to make it in the United States. We sent out somewhere north of 25 bid packets to U.S. CNC milling shops. We got back like 6 replies. 4 of them were, "Oh, we can't do that." Several of those replies were, "Yeah, we can't do those compound curves. Our machines are only 3-axis." And when I pressed them on this, what they admitted was they still programmed their G code by hand, and the engineer had never done a compound curve. For PCB assembly, even the large the companies that make keyboards in America, for a mechanical keyboard, each key switch, it gets placed by hand into a metal plate unless you're at huge volumes, and then that gets wave soldered to something that was otherwise surface mounted. The domestic companies send that stuff to China. we tried really hard to figure out how to do this in the States. We tried hard to figure out if we could do it in Oakland. And if we were selling them for $800, I could probably pull it off. If I were making 4 of them, I know I could do it. But American manufacturers, to a first approximation, don't bother to pick up the phone. And when they do pick up the phone, they say no. And which is wildly different than our experience in Asia, where people actually go to lengths to figure out how to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you considered any countries other than China or?
I mean, so Taiwan was actually our first choice over. We would have preferred to manufacture in Taiwan rather than the mainland. I've spent a lot of time in Taiwan. My former business partner is a Taiwanese guy who lives outside of Taipei. The Taiwanese manufacturers who manufacture in Taiwan, these days they're smaller. They're a little less willing to do stuff. Like we have custom keycaps. And so a couple of the OEMs we talked to basically said, oh yeah, no, we can't do that. Talking to a friend who's a boutique keyboard maker in Taipei, yeah, there are guys who are boutique keyboard makers in Taipei. He said, oh yeah, no, actually all of those companies you've talked to, they all use the same tooling shop to make their keycap tooling, and they use the same injection molding factory to do the injection molding. Here, let me take you to the injection molding company. And so it was driving out into the hills outside New Taipei City. And again, it was the factory was attached to the boss's house. There was no level floor inside the very tiny factory with 6 injection molds. They were running at full speed. So when you injection mold things, there's this sprue, this extra plastic that holds stuff in place. And I was watching them pull the sprue off of keycaps as they came out, grind it up, and push it back into the machines. And I asked them, they're like, what percentage, of recycled plastic from the sprue do you use? And they say, you don't want to go above 20%. At 20%, that's about the limits where you might start to see quality problems. Talking to folks who've done this at a little more scale, the number is usually more like 2. And it's, a lot of the keycap molds in Taiwan they've been there for 20 years. And outside of Taiwan, I have friends who've done some manufacturing in Malaysia and actually have said very good things about it. One of the US companies we were talking to was actually talking about either using their stuff in the American Southwest or in Mexico. They eventually turned us down because we're a startup. But really it comes down to we wanted to go with somebody who has made keyboards before, because there's a lot of domain experience that's useful when you've got these 64 unique little shapes that all have certain tolerances that need to get hit. When you've got to do laser engraved legends, when the assembly process actually matters. You're doing the surface mount and then the reflow. And for the most part, that is Taiwan or Shenzhen. Yeah.
How long? 2 questions. What's the time frame of that story you were telling?
Sure. So from the first bit of that story, which was the Nidi Laoban in Shenzhen, that would have been March of 2014, and the visiting the wood shop is, I think, the last bit of that, and that would have been September of 2015.
And starting over from the beginning, what would you do differently?
So starting over from the beginning,
knowing what you know now.
Yeah. Not get into hardware. I love it, and I've been having it's been an amazing education, but it's like going in. I would have brought on a mechanical engineer a lot earlier. We've been really laid back about a lot of what we've been doing because we want to get it right and don't have a lot of budget. I probably would have been pushier at contractors and been a little more demanding early on. The thing we went to Kickstarter with was not a design we could manufacture, but it was a design that worked like the one we could manufacture. There were a lot of people who told us what we could and couldn't do, and for the most part, they turned out to be wrong, sort of all the way through, people talking about what we could and couldn't make. We had initially planned to manufacture out of wood when we went into our incubator, but pretty much everyone who worked there was pretty sure that we just couldn't do it. Like that it just couldn't be, the thing we're doing couldn't really be done. And so we spent about a year working on a metal, like trying to figure out the right way to do this with metal enclosures. We got talked into adding features that we then, people recanted on a lot of things they told us to do. And if we had paid more attention to what we thought was right and what our customers wanted, we probably could have gotten there sooner without it be like, and at a similar kind of in quality of product. I don't regret the way we've done it. Like I've learned, like we have learned a lot, and part of this is like if I came into this as a trained DE or a trained ME, or with enough budget to hire them full time, this would have gone a lot smoother. It would have been a lot faster. But it's like this has also been our education at the same time, and so if we had went back, we wouldn't get the education. Other questions? Yeah.
So you're doing any sort of automated testing just for your own sanity?
So when you say automated testing of the physical product,
yes.
There will be, at the volume we're going, the way it appears to work on the Chinese mainland is that there is of course automated testing of the bare board, but once you get to the key switches, it is not worth building the automation at the kinds of volumes we're looking at. It is faster, cheaper, and more reliable to have the human. We pre-sold about 2,200 units on Kickstarter. We've pre-sold 10% more than that since then. We don't know what the eventual sales volume is going to be. If this one goes real well, we'll probably go and if people like this is our first product. We don't actually know if people are going to enjoy typing on it. We think they will. We've done everything we can to make sure. And if it turns out that it is the right thing and people like it, we'll do the cost down version that is, maybe it switches to a high quality plastic instead of the wood, maybe it drops the LEDs, and maybe it hits a much more aggressive pricing target. And that's the point where, actually building a whole bunch of tiny actuators and doing CV to make sure that that all the LEDs have an RG and a B channel working starts to make sense. I might play with it anyway, but it's not the right optimization for us for now, I think. And I may eat my words. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
What would you estimate the cost would be if you were pricing your time and your...
I know it's a totally legitimate question. The problem is that this started off as my hobby and has always been my hobby. And how do I price hobby time versus critical path corporate work time? And that.
What are the real non-time costs?
I mean, so we have paid contractors. We've mostly gotten really good pricing on most of our contractors. An individual prototype like this, if I get it made as a one-off, costs me about $1,000. As far as I can tell, if I were trying to do that here, it would cost me about $4 or $6. And so a lot of that cost is these keycaps, which get CNC milled as a set. They're about $400 a set when we make one set. When we do 20 sets with vacuum molding, they drop down to about $100 a set, and that includes painting and laser engraving.
I was asking a different question.
You sure?
I was asking how much you had to hire a translator. You had to fly over.
Oh.
Is it a
Okay, so
thing?
well, so hiring a translator for a day, Kaya did it. My recollection is it was under $100. That said, in most of the factories that we went to, there was someone who spoke good enough English that we didn't need to hire a translator. The flights for both of our trips to China, somebody else covered because we were clever and careful. I have gotten round trips to Hong Kong for about $500 when I've done a little bit of flight hacking.
So the real expense is your time.
The expense is time. The biggest expense is going to be screwing up. Like if the first batch has something badly wrong with them, that is, that's the kill the company kind of thing. And so, I mean, we've done this really, really quite on the cheap. And there's, you know, we can get a round of boards fabbed for maybe $50 to $100 a board, fully built for some of the more complex stuff. Getting stuff milled can cost some money. If you're handy with a CNC and can get a tech shop membership for prototyping, that can take that way down. We did this with an order of magnitude less money in the bank than a lot of our friends who've done similar things. On camera and mic, I don't really want to talk actual hard numbers, but it is a thing that we could have done as a hobby project, going almost to the point of pulling the trigger on manufacturing. One of the most expensive things was the Kickstarter video, which can cost thousands of dollars if you're doing something that looks marginally professional. But you don't have to do it that way. Like, you can do something that, if you have a friend who can hold the camera steady and somebody who can edit a little bit, you don't need to have it look slick and professional if it's earnest and honest. When we started off, what I thought I was making was this thing I made one of for me. It was a flat PCB, commodity keycaps, an Arduino Micro in the middle, and 4 layers of laser cut plywood screwed together. And I thought that was the product I was going to Kickstarter, because I thought this was a hobby. And I was pretty sure it would cost about $250 on Kickstarter, and I thought I'd sell it max 50 of them. And we made 2 extras, and I sent out mail to our mailing list, which was about 1,000 people at the time, because people had been following blog posts about this, and said, does anyone want to test our 2 units? We have 2 units. Tell us why you should be our beta tester. 48 hours later, we had 150 beta applications. Several people had written weird Arthurian legend fanfic. Multiple independent people really kind of creeped me out. One guy recorded a music video. He was, it's actually kind of amazing. I will, my net wasn't working, so if we can do it on, and this was a guy, if you search for Keyboard.io beta application, you will find it. Yeah, and he was in Hong Kong. He was one of our beta. We ended up sending out 6 units because the demand was a little higher than we expected. He was in Hong Kong, but we actually met him the first time we went to Shenzhen. And yeah, but that was the point where we realized that if I did this, it would be what is sometimes called a success failure. I would pre-sell more than 50 units on Kickstarter. I would be laser cutting them down the street and hand assembling them in my dining room, and it would be a total disaster. And I would lose money on every unit. Like, yeah.
Ready to go?
Yep. I'm going to shut up now. Click the ad off. Sorry. Yeah. So much painful playing online games. Off the hook for gas, the gun is so strange. If I stop singing, would you give me one? Well, they have to finish it over, and this song would have been for none. I want your keyboard. If I don't get it, I'll cry. I want your keyboard. You don't want me to die. I want your keyboard. Your keyboard, I know. Yeah. He got one. And there was pretty much no question once the video had multiple locations. Other questions? Yeah.
As you're going to scale your manufacturing, Just how are you getting to 3,000?
So the manufacturer that we are almost certainly signing with, their MOQ for us was smaller than that, astonishingly. And so the 3,000, like, we're not sure whether that is 3 orders of 1,000 units over the first 3 months, or 1 3,000 unit order with staggered delivery. That stuff will get worked out a little bit. You know, the first order we will make more than we need so that we can continue to sell them, so that when people say, oh, I want one of those, Amazon can next day it to them. I'm told that some people are willing to buy things they can actually see are in stock on Amazon that they won't kickstart. And that's, I mean, and then from there, our reorder quantity is a lot smaller than that. And so that's, I mean, at a certain level, we're just kind of going to wing it.
I'm thinking like EVT, DVT.
Okay. So, so right now, the manufacturer is doing, they say they're doing the EVT for the PCB design that we have sent them. I don't know whether that will happen before New Year's or not. Sorry, engineering verification test. So these stages of engineering verification test, design verification test, and production verification test. And so hopefully by the beginning of Chinese New Year, we will send them all of the mechanical so that shortly thereafter, they can do the EVT, they can build a couple of units for EVT of the mechanical side of it. After that, it's getting to a couple units for the DVT, and then for the production verification, it will probably, I think we were talking about a 100-unit run. And so that's enough for us to have some to test ourselves, actually send some to backers so that we can see how they fare in the real world. And so PVT is not testing the design of the product or the engineering of the product. It is testing the production process. It is making sure that we know how the production line works. It is making sure that the packaging works, that the shipping works. It's the way that you know that when you actually go in, pull the trigger on shipping 3,000 units, you don't discover that, oh, say the bottom of the box falls out. Or that half of them show up with shattered enclosures. Is that, yeah. Yeah.
For those that have used the keyboard in their day-to-day, how would they like sort of rank it above?
So some of our beta testers, I know for a fact, didn't find it to their taste. Some of our beta testers, it is the only keyboard they will use. One of the, like some of them we handed out to semi-famous people or famous people who were excited and who were friends. And some were things like we ran a contest of who can get the most of their friends to sign up for the mailing list. The person who gets the most new signups will get one. And that was a guy in the South Bay who mailed me a couple weeks after getting it saying, so there are a couple changes I want to make to the layout. Also, I really want a different key switch. I want a linear feel key switch. Do I have to unsolder the keys to be able to do that? And I said, well, there's this technique you can do with a pair of tweezers, and it's a little bit fiddly, and I'm not sure I'd recommend it. And then about a month later, he wrote me saying, so this is the keyboard I use all day, every day, and I've been starting to see some issues with the right-hand side not booting up. I'm like, I know why that is. It's because I hand-built a bunch of connectors, and they're really bad. Bring it by, and I'll fix it. And it shows up, and it's got a little, he clearly eats over his keyboard. That's fine. But he's replaced every single key switch with a linear key switch. Some of our beta users really love so one of the folks so Justin was still using his when we met him in Shenzhen like a year later. One of our early beta testers is a professional writer in Portland. Her complaint was because the key, for the one that she had, we didn't have labeled keys, so we had hand labeled them in Sharpie. She was wearing the labels off every 6 weeks. Someone she said that she met somebody in a cafe who saw her typing and offered to trade her their baby for the keyboard. She turned them down. And so I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations to understand what a black market adoption cost. And so I know that the keyboard is worth more than that to her.
Prices of kidneys by themselves.
Other questions? I'm also happy to one-on-one and let people who need to get out of here get out of here. Thank you all for listening to me yammer for a while.
All right, well, thanks to Jesse, thanks to Vince, thanks to Jesse, thanks to Philip for talking about this stuff. Obviously, a lot of people are going to want to see the demo, which we'll have around here. If you have any thoughts, remember, there's a bunch of supply frame sites that are really useful, and we'd love to tell you about them if you have any questions. Thanks for coming. We'll have another one next